Our next set of videos discusses sculpting tools in Sculptris. If you need a reminder on the program interface or navigation, please review the previous videos on Sculptris basics. We are going to begin by exploring the grab tool in Sculptris. The grab tool will be your go-to for making big changes in your model. Think of it like holding a hunk of clay in your fists and pulling it apart. I personally find the grab tool to be excessively satisfying. It allows you to make major changes very, very quickly. However, it is not a precision tool. It can be a little hard to control, so it's better for rough block-ins than it is for finishing. Let's go ahead and open the Sculptris program. By default, Sculptris will populate your window with a sphere. If, for some reason, you do not have an unaltered sphere in your window, you can get a new one by navigating over to the Tools palette in the upper left of the screen and finding the button with a circle on it. Hovering over this button lets you know what its function is, which is to create a new sphere. Clicking on it will open a dialog box asking whether you want a new scene or to add the object. Choose New Scene. As the program informs you, this will overwrite whatever's currently in your window, so be sure to save the old model if it's something you need. When a new sphere is created by Sculptris, it shows from the front by default. However, for the exercise we're doing today, we actually want to see the sphere from the side, so we want to rotate it to a cardinal point. As you may remember, to do this, you are going to put your cursor in an open area, click and drag so the sphere begins to turn, and then hit the Shift key so it snaps into place. We're actually going to rotate clockwise by moving our mouse or trackpad finger to the left so the model snaps to a right view. You can tell you've done this successfully if it says right at the bottom of the Sculptris window. Now we're going to make a couple of choices in our tool palette and menu. First, make sure the symmetry is on in the tool palette at the upper left. The symmetry button is a double-ended arrow. I'll explain more about what symmetry does in a moment, but for now just check that it's highlighted. Next, select the grab tool in the tool palette. The grab tool icon looks like 4 arrows pointing north, south, east, and west. There is also a keyboard shortcut for activating the grab tool, and that is to hit the letter G on your keyboard. Finally, as far as setting up for what we're going to do, go to the menu at the top of the Sculptris window, just to the right of the tool palette, and make sure that the toggles next to Global and Limit are off. These toggles are only available when the grab tool is selected. Limit does just what it sounds like. It limits the amount you can pull out with the grab tool, which is not what we want when blocking out a sculpture. Global means that when you use the tool, it affects the entire model rather than just what's within the diameter of our brush. This will also not work so well for what we're about to do, so make sure it's off. One weird thing about Sculptris is that it sometimes doubles up keyboard shortcuts. So the keyboard shortcut for global is actually the same as the keyboard shortcut for the grab tool, which is to say the letter G. The way it works is that if the grab tool is not active and you hit the letter G, it will select the grab tool. However, if the grab tool is already active and you hit G, it will turn on global within that tool. I bring this up because if you're ever working on a model and the grab tool is just not behaving like you would expect, check to make sure that you haven't accidentally toggled on global. Okay, let's try the tool out. When using the grab tool, think of your sphere as a ball of clay from which you can pull out shapes. In other words, the ball is the core or central mass of whatever you're making, and you are adding extensions, limbs, whatever else might come out from that center. Try it. Place the brush over the sphere, click and drag to pull out a piece. Cool, huh? Now we're going to undo what you just did in order to get back to our default sphere. Remember that undo is Control-Z on a Windows machine or Command-Z on a Mac. You can hit this key combo multiple times if you want to take more than one step back, though you should be aware that Sculptris does limit the number of times you can do it. Once you're at the default sphere and facing the right view again, we are going to take the grab tool to block out a recognizable shape. In this case, we are going to be making a leaping dolphin. I'm going to start by zooming out a little so I have space all around my sphere in which to pull shapes. To zoom out, put your cursor in an open area and use the wheel on your mouse or the vertical swipe on your trackpad to move the camera. You can also use the trick I showed you in a previous video where you start panning. That is to say, you put your cursor in an open area, hold the Alt or Option key and click, but then you let go of Alt or Option and your camera will zoom instead of panning. Before using the grab tool to block in the dolphin, I'm going to change the size of my brush. Generally speaking, you want something bigger for your first shapes. To change the size of the brush, make sure the grab tool is selected and then go to the menu at the top of the Sculptris window where you'll see a couple of sliders. Move the slider that says size to the right to make it bigger or to the left to make it smaller. To the right of this size slider is a toggle box. You don't need to worry about this, but just so you know, when this is on, the size of the brush depends on pressure sensitivity in a graphics tablet. Since most of us aren't using a tablet, it really doesn't matter to us whether the toggle is on or off. To the left of the size slider is a circle that gets bigger or smaller to approximate the change you're making in the brush size. However, the only way to really see how big your brush is to move your cursor down over your model. The edges of the brush are then indicated by an orange circle. While we're on the topic of the menu at the top of the screen, you'll probably notice that there are two other sliders that say Strength and Details. Strength controls how forcefully a tool moves material, so how much clay can the grab tool grab and pull out. For right now, leave this set to the middle. We'll play with it a little bit more later. Details has to do with the way Sculptris adjusts things under the hood. Basically, it tells Sculptris how many triangles it's allowed to add to the mesh in order to make details. If this sounds confusing to you, don't worry about it. We are not going to work much at all with the details slider, so just leave it in the middle unless you're told otherwise. This is the best setting for most situations anyway. Okay, so like I said, when working with the grab tool, it's good to think of your sphere as kind of a mass, and you're going to pull out from the center of that mass. In this case, I'm going to envision the center of the sphere as being the core of my dolphin's body, say the area around its rib cage. From that center, I'm going to pull out a tail. To do so, I place my cursor, and therefore my brush, on the right edge of the sphere so it appears to be centered. In other words, half the circle of the brush will be wrapped around the side we can't see right now, and half will be on the side we can see. Then I'm going to click and drag to pull out the length of the tail. I love this. I think it is so satisfying. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side to pull the head a little away from the core mass of the body. If the body seems a little too fat in the middle after you've done this, guess what? You can actually use the grab tool not only to pull out, but to push in. Place your brush over the area you want to adjust, click, and drag it towards the center of the mass. All right, one more pull out from this direction to create the bottlenose, extending it away from the head. I will need a smaller brush for this to avoid making too big a pull. Notice that when I pull this out, the bottlenose remains a little pointy. Don't worry about this right now. As I said, the grab tool is all about big changes. It is for blocking in. There are other tools that we will use to fine-tune the forms. Now let's add some fins. To do this, I'm going to rotate the model so it is facing front. As you probably remember, put your cursor in an open area, click and drag, and then hold Shift to snap the model to its cardinal point. If you've done it correctly, it will say front at the bottom of the Sculptris window. Once your dolphin is facing front, move your brush along the side about to where a fin would be placed. If you're not able to judge exactly where it should go from a front view, you can rotate slightly to the side to get a better sense of where to put the brush. You may need to adjust the brush size again. After selecting an appropriate spot on the slider, click and drag out to form a fin. Notice something interesting? When you pulled out one fin, a twin appeared on the opposite side. Remember that double arrow on the tool palette, the symmetry button? Well, what it does is it sets Sculptris so that any change you make on one side of the model, the right or left side that is automatically mirrored on the other. This is actually a huge time saver, particularly when you're sculpting animals or people or cars or anything else that is symmetrical around a central axis. It saves you from having to recreate a shape on the left that you've already perfectly sculpted on the right. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, but what if I want something that's asymmetrical? Don't worry, Sculptris can do that too. You just turn off symmetry in the tool palette. However, adding asymmetry should be the last thing you do when sculpting because it's a one-way trip. Once you disable the symmetry tool and start making asymmetrical sculpts, you can't turn symmetry back on unless you want to snap your entire model back into a mirrored position. We'll talk more about that in an upcoming video, but for now, just leave symmetry on. Let's finish up our blocking of the dolphin. Rotate the model to the side and use a smaller brush to pull up a dorsal fin. Then rotate to the back and pull out the tail fins. This last grab may prove the most difficult because there isn't a lot of, for lack of a better word, clay to pull from. I'm going to make it easier on myself by increasing the size of my brush a little and also increasing the strength of the tool. Remember, strength is how forceful the tool is. Turning it up will give you a couple visual cues. It will cause the circle to the left of the slider to get darker, and the orange circle that denotes the brush on your model will also get a darker orange. In practice, strength helps grab a little bit more clay from the thin tail. You will notice that as I do this, I put the brush right at the end so that the tail fins extend out from the tip of the body instead of being too far up. Sometimes it takes experimentation to get any alteration with the grab tool right, so don't be afraid to do multiple pulls or to use the undo command, Control Z or Command Z, to go back and try again. There we go. If I rotate the model around, you can see that it looks pretty dolphin-like. It's rough for sure, but in just a few minutes we established the basic form. Go ahead and save your project. You will continue working on this model in the next video.